You are listening to Chthonia, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. Chthonia's logo was designed by J.R. Malpair. Background music is Phantasm by Kevin MacLeod. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast related to the Dark Feminine. I'm your host, Breach Burke, and this week we are going to be talking about the last of the Mahavidyas, the 10th in the list. And I have placed her last for a reason. And this is the goddess Kamala. Okay, and as I had indicated about Bhuvaneshwari and also about Tripura Sundari, these goddesses, they don't appear very dark, let's put it that way. They appear a lot more auspicious than quote-unquote inauspicious. And they definitely seem to, ferocity and fierceness is definitely not associated with them. They are very approachable for the average devotee. But there are differences. They are reflections of other more traditional deities or aspects of them. And there are some differences. Kamala is considered to be sort of the Tantric manifestation of Lakshmi, the goddess of true wealth. And she's also connected to the goddess Shri, S-R-I, which, we hear that a lot as a title, and that's because Shri means respect. Okay? So it's, this has to do with respect, it has to do with auspiciousness, it has to do with material wealth, with prosperity, and also with spiritual wealth. Okay? Kamala is known as the Lotus goddess. Okay? And frequently in her iconography, she is pictured not only with lotuses, but also with elephants. And that is, at least, as Lakshmi is often portrayed with elephants, and Kamala is sometimes, as we'll see. And I want to talk a bit about her and her symbolism. And I think also in this particular podcast, I'm going to kind of wrap up the series, because after this, we're going to move on to the Ashtamatrikas, the 8 sort of ferocious mothers. Who have to do with, who are usually seen as warrior goddesses in some fashion, but they are, so we're getting back into darker territory after that. But we do want to make sure that we look at all the Mahavidyas, because all of the aspects ultimately are important. Now, let me find my first note here. Okay. First of all, let me give you a description of Kamala, and it says that what the description that I have: Kamalatmika has a golden complexion. She is being bathed by 4 large elephants who pour kalashas, or jars of amrita, nectar, over her. She has 4 hands. In 2 hands she holds 2 lotuses, and her other 2 hands are in Abhaya Mudra, which is the fearlessness gesture, and Vara Mudra, which is the gesture of conferring boons, respectively. She's shown seated in Padma Asana, which is the lotus position, lotus posture, which most of us are familiar with who practice meditation. And she's sitting on a lotus, which is a symbol of purity. So she's associated with Vimala, the quality of purity. And Kamala's origin is said to say, sort of in this more cosmical view, says that Mahashakti created the entire universe, but her task remained incomplete. Even though the universe was complete, it was unfinished due to the absence of grace. She had transformed herself into Kamala to manifest all types of wealth and prosperity in the world. Only by her appearance as Kamala, the world will be prosperous, and so she manifested to provide prosperity to the world. So, okay, again, it's not, though she's not really a separate goddess from Shakti, as none of the Mahavidyas are. She is a manifestation, and she is that manifestation associated with the quality of prosperity. Okay, so that is her her association. Now, let's talk a little bit about her association with the goddess Shri. It says, this is, again, I'm looking at David Kinsley. He says, early references to Kamala call her Shri and consistently associate her with positive qualities. Indeed, the name Shri means auspicious. For example, in the Shatapatha Brahmana, she is identified with food, royal power, luster, fortune, and beauty. Her positive qualities and auspicious nature are elaborated in the Sri Shukta, an early hymn in her praise, probably dating back to pre-Buddhist times. She gives wealth and other desired objects to her devotees, is beautiful and adorned with costly ornaments, and is associated with fertility and growth. Okay, now, as I mentioned, Kamala, Sri, Lakshmi, they're associated with the lotus and the elephant, and they're both central. And Kinsley says that the lotus seems to have two general meanings, first related to life and fertility. On a cosmic scale, the lotus represents the entire created order. Because remember, the lotus grows out of the navel of either Vishnu or a Brahma, actually, is usually, where the universe is, Brahma comes out of the lotus, and then from him, the creation of the world comes out, and it's always portrayed as sitting on a lotus. The cosmos as lotus-like suggests a world that is organic, vigorous, and beautiful. It is the fecund vigor that's suggested by the lotus that is revealed in Sri. She is the life force that pervades creation. And he says, second, especially in relation to Sri, the lotus suggests spiritual purity, power, and authority. So those are the three things she's really associated with. And it makes sense because she is very much associated with royalty and the people of political stature. The lotus sea is a common theme in Hindu and Buddhist iconography. Gods and goddesses, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are shown seated or standing on a lotus. Like the lotus, which is rooted in mud, but whose blossoms are uncontaminated by it, these spiritual beings are understood to transcend earthly limitations of the world, the mud of existence, as it were. Sri's association with the lotus suggests she symbolizes a certain perfection or state of refinement that transcends the material world, yet is rooted in it. So, again, the lotus is actually quite a potent image because the lotus, and of course it's always portrayed as sort of the thousand-petaled lotus. That is actually the name of the chakra at the top of the head. What we call the crown chakra is known as the Sahasrara, which is the thousand-petaled lotus. And that is considered to be, the highest sort of spiritual state. But it's rooted in the rest of the system down to the Muladhara chakra. And yeah, and so that's the idea. There's actually something, I'm reminded of Jung's study of alchemy, where he talks about the transmuting, at least allegorically. He tended to view this more as a process of consciousness and not having to do with the literal transformation of base metal into gold. Because a lot of the idea was that, the idea is that out of the shit, out of the manure of things, gold is formed, or that it can come. And we have a very similar idea here with the lotus, the idea of this alchemical idea of from the dreck of, and if we're speaking on a psychological level or depth psychology level, from the dreck of our consciousness, the gold is produced, eventually. And it is only through, it's just like if you want to plant something, people who keep a compost heap out back, how disgusting that can be and how bad it can smell and everything. But that compost is extremely fertile for growing new things. And that is sort of the metaphor here. This is, the lotus represents that. It's the idea that, is rooted in this, something that we consider to be dirty or impure in some way, but what comes out of it is something extremely pure. So there's definitely a profound significance there in terms of the way that the, what we generally consider to be the filth is actually the stuff of life. So there's a meditation on that. This is one of the reasons I have such a, I don't know. I don't want to say I have an aversion to the term purity, but I worry about its use. And I worry about the associations with it. Because purity, purity can be things like, keeping clean and keeping germs that will make you ill away from you and, practicing basic hygiene and, freshening yourself up. I mean, believe me, if you've been outside working all day and then you go in and take a shower, nothing feels good as to wash the dirt off, But by the same token, we can become overzealous in that and decide that we have to remove anything that we think of as impure or polluted from our lives. And this especially will happen in a Western system where we try to separate the sinful from the non-sinful, because of course the sinful becomes equated with the impure and the dreck, and we decide it's something to be eliminated, but nothing grows if you eliminate it. Okay, you have to. That's why sex is often considered to be an impure thing, because people say, "Well, it's animalistic and it's dirty," but it's like, well, yeah, but, but that's how you make children if that's what your goal is. It's a creative process. Everything creative is dirty in some fashion. You have to get dirty, even if you're creating something that, isn't a plant, animal, or human being or whatever. The creative process is messy. I mean, think about anybody who's written a book or who has, tried to put a certain project together. There's a certain amount of messiness that goes along with that. There's a certain amount of disorder. And that's all part of the system. And I think that's part of the message here as well. Now, moving on, Kamala is also associated with the elephant. Okay. And back to Kinsley here, he says the association with the elephant suggests other aspects of her character that are ancient and persistent. One of the most common representations of Shri shows her flanked by 2 elephants that are showering her with water from their trunks. The elephants have 2 meanings. According to Hindu tradition, elephants are related to clouds and rain, and hence fertility. And this may also be why Ganesha is an elephant-headed god, because he brings that kind of auspiciousness and removes obstacles. Second, elephants suggest royal authority. Kings kept stables of elephants, which they rode in processions and used in military campaigns. Kings were held responsible for bringing timely rains and for the fertility of the land generally. Their possession of elephants is probably related to that role as well. Okay, so that has a lot to do with her iconography. So that has, so in this case, the elephants not only have to do with, okay, so we've got the sort of the mud and the lotus aspect, and now we've got the rain and the necessity of rain to, even though we like to see the sun, the necessity of rain to also bring life. So there's kind of a subtext there that which we think of as, although water also has a purifying element to it too, as we were just saying. So, these are all the elements that bring about life and that potentially bring about prosperity. Okay. I also have in the notes here that Kamala is associated with the Graha Shukra, which is just the planet Venus. Okay. So it said that certainly in Vedic system, Vedic astrology, when you look at your chart, if there are inauspicious aspects in your chart, then you request to have a puja done to those particular aspects. So, for example, just to give you an example, when I first left my husband, I had my chart done by a Vedic astrologer, and I was at that time in my Ketu phase of life. Okay, Ketu being like the south node of the moon. And generally, it's considered a time, it's not considered to be the most auspicious time, although I found in a lot of ways it was very auspicious for me. But it was, it's a time of like, when you really should be by yourself. It kind of made sense that I left my husband at that time, because it was like, yeah, this is a time for things to come to an end, for you to be alone, to self-reflect, to, do more spiritual practice. But I remember that the astrologer said, well, you should, have the ashram, have somebody at the temple say, do Ketu puja on your behalf. So pujas, yeah, that's, the idea is that you propitiate the planetary aspects almost as though they're deities, because they're, and in some sense they are, because they represent certain qualities. Okay, so Venus is the deity or graha that is associated with Kamala. Okay. Okay, so what else do we have here? Okay, so let's talk for a minute about Lakshmi, because Kamala is the tantric manifestation of Lakshmi. Now, Lakshmi as a goddess, again, she has to do with prosperity. She has to do with true wealth, but both material and spiritual. Okay, so she's very, very favored, certainly in upper caste households for sure. She's, and even among others. I mean, the festival of Diwali, the festival of lights, is associated with Lakshmi. It's driving out a Lakshmi, which we had talked about in the Dumavati episode, because Dumavati tends to be associated with a Lakshmi. And it's interesting that within the Mahavidyas, we have aspects associated with both a Lakshmi and Lakshmi in the tantric, these tantric visions. Now, Lakshmi is considered to be an indulgent and forgiving mother. Okay, that's her thing. She often appeals to her husband, who is Vishnu, on behalf of devotees, because Vishnu is almost given a judgmental role, like the wise king who pronounces judgment kind of thing. And that in this case, Lakshmi is sort of one who intercedes. One might think of, again, in Western Christian iconography, of the Virgin Mary. Although Lakshmi, I don't think, is portrayed as necessarily virginal, although I don't know that her sexual aspect is necessarily emphasized. But she is considered to be a dutiful and submissive wife to Vishnu. Okay, which again, that's an iconography that translates to Western ideas of the divine feminine. Okay. Now, Lakshmi is associated with the male deities, or Shri, because Shri is actually a much older deity, and I think she sort of becomes Lakshmi out of that. And of course, Kamala being associated with Lakshmi as well. They're all kind of the same. Okay, back to Kinsley here. He talks about her, she's associated with several male deities, each of whom suggests aspects of her character. One of her earliest associations is with the god Soma, who is identified with plants and vegetative vigor. It is appropriate that Sri Lakshmi, who is also identified with the vitality of plants, should be linked with him. Some texts say that Sri Lakshmi is the wife of Dharma. Okay, now that's interesting because Dharma has to do with order and performing your correct social duty to obtain prosperity, which is another translation of Shri. Okay, many texts emphasize that in her relationship with Indra, the royal authority and fertility are central. Indra, you might think of, he is sort of a storm god, and he is considered to be king of the gods, which gives him a lot in common with, say, gods like Yahweh, or gods like Zeus in the Greek pantheon. There's definitely, or Lugh in the Celtic. It says Indra's political fortunes are directly related to Sri Lakshmi in several myths. When she dwells with him, he prospers politically and economically. When she abandons him or lives with one of his adversaries, he is bereft of royal authority and wealth. The myths make it clear that kingly power, authority, and prosperity are directly related to Sri, and that without her, a king cannot succeed. So this is it. She's you see all of these male gods who are powerless without these female forces behind them. He indicates that Lakshmi and Indra complement and reinforce each other in this respect, as he is strongly identified with bringing rain, hence the elephant connection there, a symbol of fertility, and his favorite weapon is the thunderbolt. Okay, so the other association that Kinsley mentions is Sri Lakshmi's association with the god Kubra, another example of her identification with wealth, vegetative growth, and fertility. Kubra is related to wealth. He is said to be the possessor and distributor of wealth, and to possess and guard the earth's treasure. In some sense, that would liken him to Hades or Pluto, because Pluton is another aspect that has to do with wealth, or the treasures that come. Like I said, precious gems, gold, those all come from the earth. He is also said to be leader of the Yakshas, creatures who dwell in the woods and forests and promote the growth of plants. So in general, we see, obviously in a society that relies on, obviously for any of us to have food, even though we rarely see the process, agriculture, livestock, all these things are what keep us alive. So it makes sense that you would be associated with that kind of life, vegetative life in particular, so that which would be sort of another underlying element of prosperity is, having a bountiful harvest. Okay. Now again, her relationship to Vishnu, that's one of the central things of Lakshmi herself. He says in Hindu myth, their association begins as a result of the churning of the ocean of milk. We're back to that one, by the gods and demons to seek the elixir of immortality, or amrita. In the process of churning, they stir up desirable objects and beings, among whom is Lakshmi. This lovely goddess is granted to Vishnu, who is the leader of gods in this myth. And Vishnu, of course, is strongly associated with kingship. Again, Brahma is the Brahma who comes out of the lotus of his navel is his dream. So Vishnu is sort of precedes Brahma. He's depicted as a divine king. His avatars all serve to uphold the social and political order and to promote dharma. He supports righteous kings on earth through whom he is said to uphold society. So it makes sense that Lakshmi would be associated with him. And again, she's portrayed as loyal, modest, and loving. She's described as occupied with domestic chores such as cooking, and is typically depicted as subservient to her husband. Iconographically, she is often shown massaging Vishnu's feet and is much smaller than he. Her submissive position is clearly conveyed in an image from Badami, in which he sits on a high stool while she sits on the ground and leans on him, her right hand on his knee, which is kind of a submissive and appeal. That's actually the posture of appealing to to someone's mercy, or to some that you see this a lot. Like I'm thinking of the Greek tragedy of Hecabe, or Hecuba, where Euripides has her get down on her knees and tries to put her hand on Odysseus's knee, and of course he wants to turn away from her because that's the appeal, the supplication for mercy, And she says to him, don't think I'm going to appeal for your mercy, but she does, but she gets down on her knees in that posture as though to say, I'm submitting myself to you. Okay. Her cosmic role, okay, back to Lakshmi here, as is particularly striking in the Lakshmi Tantra, a popular Pancharatra, thank you, I'm not saying it wrong, Pancharatra text, which says that she single-handedly undertakes the creation of the universe with only 1/1000th a part of herself. The text describes Lakshmi as pervading the entire created order and as regulating the social and moral orders as well. In effect, in this text, she takes over the roles of Vishnu as creator of the universe and the regulator of Dharma. Okay. Now, they also mention in the Vaishnava school of South India, she's the mediator between the devotees and Vishnu in this particular school of Vaishnavite thought. So that is, and he is inclined to be stern and righteous, and she moderates his character. Okay, so, all right, so this is what we know about Lakshmi and about her relationship. She is a deity very much associated, she acts as a support, moderator, and a balance to the male deities. At the same time, she is sort of considered to be a source of prosperity and material wealth. That's not entirely unlike other mythologies in which the Earth Mother, whether it be Gaia or whether it be some other kind of name that we use, in whatever culture for the Earth Mother, it is the Earth Mother who brings forth the fruits, whether it be something that we grow or something that we mine. Because think about it, our money and our material wealth all comes from stuff, it's all based on gold, or at least in theory, it's based on gold. Comes from things that are from the earth. So in that sense, she is kind of almost a type of Earth Mother. She is that embodiment of the manifestation of prosperity. So this is going to raise the question for us at this point of why is she a Mahavidya? I mean, you can kind of understand that, but at the same time, when we look at the character of the Mahavidyas, we're like, none of them really they all seem to be, if she is there to uphold the social order, the goddesses of the Mahavidyas do not uphold the social order. So it's kind of like, okay, so what is Kamala? Who is this Tantric Kamala? Like, how is she, I mean, she is Lakshmi. She definitely has the attributes of Lakshmi. But as Kinsley has says, and those that, the Shaktas that he has spoken to, it is though Kamala is selectively, has selective aspects of Lakshmi. Okay, so let's talk about the differences. First of all, one of the things that's noted is that Kamala is frequently shown without Vishnu. Okay? You never see images of her with Vishnu. Now, does this mean that Kamala is unmarried? Well, I don't think any of that's explicitly stated, but there is definitely the sense of independence from her husband. So, okay, so now we have this Kamala, this goddess of prosperity, and this compassionate intervener with her judge husband, which again has more of a patriarchal flavor to it. Kamala stands alone. She does not, she is not portrayed as a Mahavidya with Vishnu. And while they say her association with elephants does persist, she's not many times she is not pictured with elephants. Okay, when she is portrayed as Kamala. She's portrayed by herself, sitting on a lotus. She's still associated with the lotus. And in the Mahavidya stories, she's associated more with Shiva than with Vishnu, which actually does make sense, because when we think about Shiva, again, the origin story of the Mahavidyas, they are the 10 manifestations of Parvati. So if Kamala is a manifestation of Parvati, then she's the spouse of Shiva. She's not the spouse of Vishnu. Okay. So let me just, I'm going to read a little bit on that from here. He says, Kinsley says on page 229, Vaishnava connections do not dominate Kamala's incarnation as a Mahavidya. Although she is linked to Vishnu from time to time, she's rarely associated with Vaishnava avatars or their consorts as one might expect. She's rarely identified with Sita, Radha, or Rukmini, though she is sometimes associated with Vahari and Vaishnavi, two of the Saptamatrikas. Okay, we're actually going to look at the Ashtamatrikas. We're going to look at 8. So yeah, and those are two very fierce aspects. Okay. In fact, Kamala in her Mahavidya form seems to be associated or identified as frequently with Shiva or Shiva's consort as she is with Vishnu. Her 1,000-name hymn in the Shakta Pramoda, for example, calls her Shiva, Rodri, Gauri, she whose bliss is Shiva, she who is dear to the one who does the Tandava dance, which is Shiva, Sati, and Kapali. Okay, so these all connect her with Shakti. Okay, again, this is keeping with the tendency to associate goddesses with Shiva, and consistent with the accounts of the origins of the Mahavidyas, which usually feature Shiva. Right, we've already said that. Now here's the other thing. She's also got fearsome qualities. Okay, you would not imagine a goddess like this to have fearsome qualities, but as a Mahavidya, her what do we call it? Why am I not remembering the name for that? For the 108 names, all of a sudden it's like that name's gone out. I mean, I know there's the Sahasranama Stotras, but there's also the 108 names. And basically in her Namavalis and in her Stotras, in the Shakta Pramoda, she's called Kalarachi, which is another fearsome name for Kali. We're going to talk about Kalarachi at another point. She who wears a garland of skulls, she whose form is very terrible. Gora means generally has to do with something that's very awful. Bhima, which is terrible, and Tamasi, which is darkness, literally she who is the tamas guna, okay, which would associate her with the forbidden things. Although benign and auspicious qualities dominate her character as a Mahavidya, a fearsome and dangerous dimension is suggested in these epithets. And he notes that another feature that characterizes her, that characterizes Kamala, but is absent from her worship and cult outside the Mahavidyas, or at least it's very weak, is that as a demon slayer. Outside the Mahavidyas, Lakshmi is strongly associated with Vishnu and Durga, who are the demon slayers par excellence in Hindu mythology. Lakshmi herself, however, does not take an active part. She's primarily a witness to Vishnu or his avatars while they slay demons, or is displayed with Durga during Durga Puja, because she's one of the three Devis, Durga, Lakshmi, and Saraswati, where she is said to be Durga's daughter. There are female Vaishnavite goddesses who slay demons in the Devi Mahatmya, namely Vaishnavi, Vahari, and Narasimhi, so that would associate her with the Matrikas. None of these, though, is directly identified with Lakshmi. Her epithets in the Shakta Paramoda, though, give her the epithets directly identifying her with the demon-slaying goddess Durga, or one of Durga's demon-slaying helpers. She is called, for example, slayer of Madhu and Kaitaba, slayer of Shumba and Nishumba, and also called Durga. And as I said, they identify her with Narasimhi, Varahi, and, who are these as well. Again, we are going to talk about them when we get into the discussion of the Matrikas. But, so Kamala has this sort of fierce aspect that is not, that's not considered to be the dominant feature of her character, but it's there. And, and again, this may have to do with sort of the double-edged meaning of the quality of prosperity. The way, what it can mean and what it means to have things or to be taken away, or what the dangers are actually of pursuing material interests. Now, one of the things Kinsley had notes, she is, as I said, she is the 10th Mahavidya. So out of the 10, Kali is 1, Tara is 2, Tripura Sundari is 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we go through all the Mahavidyas, and Kamala is the last one. And as I said, I've not done these in any order, but the Shaktas have said that, and the Tantric practitioners have said, yes, there is a meaning to the order. And they'll say that Kali is the strongest and that Kamala is the weakest. And that doesn't seem like that's entirely true. It's not that Kamala is weak. But as it's been said, one has to struggle with Kali, but they're pampered by Kamala. So it's almost like what I had said, and I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, or at least a couple back. If those of you who practice Kabbalah and think about the tree of life as moving from the lightest point at Keter, which is connected to the Ein Sof and the limitless light, and its relationship to Malkut, which represents kingdom, which represents the earth and the world. Frequently in Hebrew or Jewish thinking, the Shekinah dwells in Malkut, which is the lowest Sephirot, the 10th Sephirot. Mind you, there are 10 Sephirot as well. It might be interesting to see, not that there's any, mind you, there's no ancient connection between Kabbalah and Tantric practice, but it would be interesting to see how well the 10 Sephirot might match up in some fashion with these particular goddesses. I haven't actually done that, but that might be an interesting thing to meditate on. I would not look for a correspondence there where there may not be one. But the point that I am making is that the tree of life is one. So therefore, the tree of life is one. So therefore, you have these 10 Sephiroth, and one appears to be closer to the spiritual and one appears to be closer to the material, just as here we have Kali, who seems to deal more with the raw ultimate truth, whereas Kamala has to do with the prettiness of nature and acquisitions of things and living in the world. It's more a case of showing you that the totality of creation is divine. There's not a piece of it. One is not superior to the other. It's just that one is closer to raw consciousness and one is more about the manifest world. Okay. So she's her, but Kamala is probably a very easy goddess to worship. It's not, there's not a whole lot of danger associated with worshiping Kamala, where there might be with some of the other Mahavidyas. Okay. And some say it's also the fact that she is so focused on, well, I shouldn't say she's focused, but those who worship her tend to be more focused on gaining material status or social or political status. So therefore, those are considered to be very worldly goals, which would kind of put her in with Tantra, because Tantra is about living in and experiencing the world and not renouncing it all in the name of spirituality. Okay. Not that might not be a path that some tantras take, but there's definitely a sense of balancing the material and the spiritual worlds. Okay. So let's see. Okay, I have one other reflection on Kamala here. Let me see. Okay. So this is just some reflections now that I'm gonna go into. The profit of worshipping Kamala or Lakshmi, and this is something I'm taking from, again, one of the Tantra sites, for the highest spiritual good is not only the blessings of material security, but of spiritual progress. Kamala teaches commitment to the spiritual path through riddance of drama of our daily lives and bitterness towards others. The true nature of Kamala is the radiant beauty of the cosmos that is manifest in the material world. Kamala is the spirit of nature itself, and she is manifest in the natural world. She can be worshipped by simply spending time in nature and appreciating its profound beauty. Through recognition of her beauty in the natural world, an individual moves further towards liberation. A spiritual follower who detaches the fruits of action and finds enjoyments in the acts of service, generosity, and prayer for their own sake can truly begin to grasp the inner nature of Kamala, the light of divine consciousness and connection with the self. Kamala embodies the spirit of giving, receiving graciously and gratefully instead of with greed. She teaches that true wealth is measured by generosity, spiritual depth, and freedom from ego-driven desires. When followers ask something of Kamala in greed, she may grant desires with all of the associated negative consequences. Just going to pause there and think about Dionysus or Bacchus granting King Midas his golden touch. You know, everything you touch turns to gold. Well, that includes your food and your beloved daughter and this and that. You know, you can, you know, there's a relationship there of, yes, I'll grant you your wish, but there's a trickster-ish element there. Okay. Kamala does have the tendency to remind us that she is also the goddess Kali, who teaches detachment and surrender. This helps remind followers to trust the way as they find a spiritual path that serves the highest good instead of being seduced by worldly desires for the sake of material gain. It's not, I want to be clear, though, there's not a renunciation of the spiritual world. There's more of it's more of the idea that the spiritual world, the material world, has to be put in proper perspective and treated respectfully. Okay, but it doesn't mean that that life should not be enjoyed or that you should never indulge, but just that if that's your entire goal in life, then you're going to have the consequences associated with that. And it says, in this way, Kamala can be seen as a teacher of financial responsibility in terms of learning to save, paying off debt, investing wisely and without greed, and not taking what is not freely given, making charitable offerings, and not spending more than can be afforded. Yeah, boy, that's been a lesson recently, hasn't it? With everything that's gone on, with everyone being quarantined because of the pandemic. I hate to continue bringing that up during these podcasts, but it seems to me that that's a very hefty world lesson that we're faced with at this time. Okay. Okay, so just to continue, just to reflect sort of on the Mahavidyas in general. So, okay, so we've reached Kamala, we've reached this, she's sort of our, the Malkut. She's the one that represents that sort of prosperity that's both, and the wise handling of the material world. But her tantric aspect, like I said, there are fierce aspects and there are independent aspects. And this makes us kind of reflect on the whole Mahavidya story as a whole. There's first of all, we look at what I've just said, the idea that divine permeates all creation. There's not a separation between what is considered auspicious and inauspicious, even though that's frequently. And I think what we can say is that if we're looking at any religious system in terms of the social order, okay, a lot of the injunctions between right action and wrong action just have to do with controlling one's impulses because we have to live with other people. This is not, we need to take care of ourselves and we need to live with other people. And our natural behaviors are not always, actually, more often than not, our natural inclinations are not the best ones. When we gain something, we're inclined to want more of it. We're inclined towards greed. When you have a group over a certain size, I think Skinner had said it was more than 11 people, but probably it's even less than that. You can have a group of people. If you just have one person who wants to be in charge of everything, and wants to control everybody else and everything else that's going on, that's just enough to disrupt the dynamic. So you have certain checks and balances, as it were, in place to try to keep things in balance so everybody can live together and everybody can live the life that they have, because living life is part of it. I mean, we talk a lot about death, but living life is part of it, right? And the Mahavidyas seem to represent every part of that cycle. Some of them seem to be more associated with death, the abyss, and like Kali, for example, Dumavati, who has to do with the void between life and death, and the sort of the eventual rebirth. So we see all these goddesses. Dumavati, I think, is somewhere in the middle. So she's the void, and then we start to see these sort of the rebirth, these goddesses of creation and prosperity and preservation. So the Mahavidyas as a whole, you could almost represent them. They actually appear to Shiva in a circle, both above, below, and around him, and that would also suggest a cyclical nature to them as well. They represent that cycle of creation, preservation, and destruction. In the 10 Mahavidyas, we see all aspects of the feminine, and that's reflected in the Tridevas to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, or Rudra in some versions, as creator, preserver, and destroyer. Okay, all of these emanate from the Sri Chakra. They all emanate from the Shakti, the Adipara Shakti. Okay, and all of them have connections to Shiva because ultimately we're in the sphere of time and everything comes to an end. And Shiva is associated. I mean, he is also associated with creating life in his relationship to Shakti, but or to Parvati, but also the fact that everything is temporal, everything comes to an end. Okay, all of them have fierce aspects. Even gentle Kamala has fierce aspects, even if they're understated. On some level, they're all part of the same Shakti, and they're not mutually exclusive to each other. It's very easy to look at all of them, and we look at what their differences are, but you'll notice that some of them have the same names, or if you look at their stotras, they're listed as, Lalita Tripura Sundari will be described as actually all of these, Kali, Bhuvaneshwari, Bagalamukhi. I mean, they're all in her stotra, and you say, well, aren't those separate goddesses? Well, no, they're all aspects of each other because they all, in a complicated way, represent different aspects of the same manifestation of existence. And that's something that's also hard for the West to understand. There's a lot of people, especially when I'm teaching religion, people who will say, oh, well, there's a video that came out many years ago. I think it was, I forget what it was called, The Search for, it wasn't In Search Of, that's different. This guy Ron with a really bad suit, 70s suit, was the one who had narrated this series. But it was all in the different major world religions, and the one that I was thinking of in particular with him was was the one that on Hinduism, which is called 300 Million Gods. And that is something that people have in the West. When I talk about it, they're like, well, I don't understand how you can worship 300 million gods. And it's like, understand that what we're talking about is all the aspects of creation. Creation is very complicated. You can't reduce it or simplify it to one thing or two forces. I mean, we may talk about one God in the West, and many people, people are very insistent to me, well, God is one. Then God is cracked up in a lot of ways. I mean, it's not suggesting that they're even in Hinduism. Like I said, I've always said Hinduism is more monistic than polytheistic, even though it's apparently polytheistic, because the underlying reality is unified. That's actually the ultimate truth, that the separation that you see is an illusion. And it's ironic in a way that the religions, the monotheistic religions that talk about one God, are the ones so focused on separation. The religion that has many gods is the one that's focused on unity. So it's weird, because they're kind of the reverse of each other in a lot of ways. But all of these gods and goddesses, they show the complexity of it. They show how far beyond thought a lot of this is. I mean, we try to meditate on these. This is just a way for us to connect with and meditate on those qualities, but they're so vastly different from, what we're thinking of as the divine is embedded in our day-to-day experience, but we frequently miss it because we are so focused on the separateness, or we are so focused on just certain aspects or certain goals of our own, that, a lot of times you can miss it. And I think in Hinduism, when you have, okay, I've bought a car, I'm going to do a puja to Ganesha. Oh, I've done this, I'm going to do a puja. It's reminding you of the divine that's present in everything. And these kind of represent this very deep reality, which is very awesome, very terrible, because it includes death. Okay, and this is the way that the East negotiates death. I mean, death is not an ultimate ending. When they burn everything dies, then everything comes back again. But it's, but there's this definite sense of, the complexity. And the thing is, and the origin is feminine. The origin is Mahashakti. And that is, and that very terrifying, mysterious, but also, as we can see, benevolent female force. The Tantra here tries to show all the aspects. Which is why like I said, in a discussion of the dark feminine, to me, this is like the ultimate expression. It shows you all of the manifestations of the feminine, and it really allows you to look at all these different aspects and think about how you relate to those different aspects. And, if, for example, if you only exclusively relate to the one having to do with prosperity and material gain, well, then that's more objectified. That is one thing that's been said about Lakshmi, some of these goddesses, is that they tend to be viewed more as, some of them is more as objects than as, being active. So like, for example, Lakshmi sitting passively next to Vishnu. There's this, the Mahavidyas that are closer to that source are considered to be dynamic and active, which again, if we think of the yin-yang concept, we don't tend to think of the feminine as dynamic and active. But in Tantra, and the root is, we associate the feminine with passivity, but the reality is that the feminine is the root of everything and is the active force. It has its passive aspects too, but it's everything. It encompasses everything. Okay. And here with the Mahavidyas, we're seeing all of those different aspects and their relationship to each other. And they're not mutually exclusive. Okay, there's the importance of sex and the material world in this system. Okay, those things are not rejected as being somehow sinful or to be avoided. Not that there aren't people, sages and renunciates and practitioners who don't disengage themselves from those things. But it's understood at the deepest level that those things are important. I think they, again, in the interest of people maintaining the order, they don't generally advise that the average person indulge in these kinds of things. But by the same token, once you, once you have a certain respect and understanding for the world, then that's kind of like, okay, that's why you have the sages like you do with Tara, where he's practiced all these austerities for years and then is told that the truth comes in the practice of the 5 forbidden things, that's the proper worship of Tara. So, you have these different elements where, that has a place. And we need to stop thinking in terms of sinful and not sinful and placing judgments on people. There are judgments with the law in terms of whether your actions are harmful and destructive to somebody else in society. That's the way it works. But the idea that all of these things are inherently things that that are evil and that you should avoid, that's really turned on its head here, okay? And it's just simply not true, okay? So there's all this, and there's also kind of a tricksterish element to the Mahavidyas. There's always something that subverts the natural order or subverts the social order in some way. And lastly, they all have to do with this fullness of consciousness and power through Adiparashakti, this sort of the root of the feminine consciousness. And again, if you've experienced the Shakti of any kind in meditation, if you might have even experienced it another way. It might not even be through any kind of Hindu or meditative practice. You can certainly experience it through certain varieties of Western religion. But when you experience it, it's something, that's a very, very potent energy. And if it's not properly moderated in the body, it can actually be harmful. But it is your life force energy, and it's again, it's just like the electricity in your house. If you've got old wiring and a faulty box, then it's probably going to burn down. Similarly, you want to make sure that I suppose that you're up to code, right? That everything is working as it should. So the Mahavidyas represent all the aspects of that power. They represent what's dangerous about them, but also how engaging them, how important it is to engage them in spite of the danger, depending on where you're at. Obviously, someone who's not ready for that shouldn't just jump right in, but this is not an aspect of light to be rejected as an evil. And with that, I'm going to end this series on the Mahavidyas. We will start with the Matrikas in the next episode. Again, I will direct you to Chthonia.net. Please check out not only where all podcasts are listed, but also my YouTube channel is connected in there, and all of my related services, and also my writings and other work. If you wish to support, patreon.com/Chthonia. Again, thank you to any new subscribers, and I really appreciate the ones who have been around for a while. And social media, Chthonia Podcast, one word, Twitter and Instagram, 2 words on Facebook, and Chthonia on YouTube. And with that, I wish you all well until the next episode.